Welcome to Accelerated Engineering. My name is John, and this is the Encyclopedia entry, or the video Encyclopedia entry, pardon me, for the cell function. And if you've noticed that I'm not at the usual origin, it's because I have a whole bunch of stuff off screen that we're going to talk about in a moment. What the cell function does is it accepts one of a variety of arguments and returns information about a particular cell. Now, the very interesting thing about this is that it, of course, includes a reference, so you can direct it to return information about a particular cell, in this case U2, and of course it brings up U2. If I stretch this down, it should bring up information about all of the corresponding cells as I drag down. But this is the really interesting part. If the reference is omitted, then it returns information about the selected cell at the time of calculation. So for example, if I'm in cell S7 and update my worksheet, that function returns S7. If I'm over in W2, it brings up W2, which makes for a very interesting way of gathering information about your worksheet. An important note is that if you are working with other people in a worksheet, for example, in the online version, then it will bring up the cell that you have selected, information about your cell, not anybody else's. So the official support.microsoft.com suggests that you always put a reference in unless you are knowledgeably putting in no reference and intending to calculate the most recent cell that you have selected. I think there's a lot of very interesting functions that could come about from this. Okay, now let's take a look at those individual arguments. We've already demonstrated the address function. An address just brings up the name or the address of the cell that you most recently clicked. I think that could be useful if you wanted to return, if you had, say, a range with a bunch of values. You could have a cell that just said, oh, well, equals square root cell address, something like this. Pardon me, cell, and then address, and add no other arguments, and then it'll complain, I think. But if I were to select this cell, and then, actually here, no, we'll just type a number over here. Type a number over here. Doesn't do what I wanted it to do. No. Cell address doesn't bring back a number, of course. No. That was dumb. Cut this part of the video. Let's go look over here. We've already talked a little bit about address. Address brings up the address of the cell that is currently selected. Nice and easy. If you put a reference in, then it will always return a constant value. Column will always return the column of the cell either referenced, in this case D3, which is the fourth column, or the cell that you've selected. Color, I had a little bit of a harder time with color. Microsoft support says that it brings back a 1 if the cell is formatted in color for negative values, and otherwise returns 0. But maybe I can actually make that work now, wouldn't that be funny? But when I take more number formats and give it a color for negative values and hit OK, update the sheet, then it works this time. Yay! Then it shows 1 to indicate that, in fact, cell D4, when given a negative number, shows up in red. My other cells don't do that. That leads us to contents. What contents does is it just returns the value or whatever happens to be in the cell that is put here. If I put a function, it returns the value held in that function with no ifs, ands, or buts thereafter. File name is interesting because it just brings back the entire file name all the way up to the drive level of the spreadsheet containing the cell that is selected. This could be useful across, I wonder if it would work across multiple spreadsheets actually. I'll have to look into that separately. So it gives the entire directory right down to the name of the spreadsheet, volatilefunctions.xlsx, and the name of the sheet, which can be useful if you need to dynamically change values based on the value held in the sheet. Now, format is an interesting one. And I'm not going to claim to have grasped this fully yet, because it's based on the number format of the cell. And it seems like it shows, I haven't figured out all the details of this, but it shows G when there's nothing. But if I have a particular number format and give it a number, in this case I've got it, given it one where there's a few decimal places, a couple of decimal places, it brings back F2. And I'm not entirely sure what the F stands for, but if I increase the number of zeros and force it to update again, then it brings back the number of decimal places. I'm not sure why it does that. It just does. So I'll leave it at that. Parentheses is intended to do a similar thing to color. It indicates if a cell has been formatted with parentheses for positive or all values, and otherwise it returns 0. And I haven't got that that quite figured out yet. It's an accounting format. It's not one that I'm familiar with. Prefix is kind of nifty because it returns information based on the way that your cell is formatted. For example, if I put just random text into this cell, it shows a single quotation mark, which indicates that that cell contains text. If I give it a number, it goes away. Blank means that it's just a numerical value. And if I understand this correctly, then if I right align my cell, particularly right align it, update, it should have brought back a new value. Because it's got a number. If I input text and then right align it, it brings up a double quotation mark. If I center align it, it should bring up a caret. But force it to update. There we go. And that's just kind of interesting. There's a couple of other fill alignments, but that's the gist of it. Protect indicates if a cell is locked or not. It returns 1 if the cell is locked and 0 if the cell is unlocked. And that can be manipulated by checking in the format cell under protection and changing the locked value. And this changes whether a cell is protected when the whole spreadsheet is locked. I change it thusly and then update. It changes to 0. Okay. Row just returns the row of the cell that is input or presently selected at update time. Now, so if I update a cell up here, it was a 1 when I had that selected. If I go down here, it's 17 when I had that cell selected. I feel like there's some interesting uses for that. I just haven't figured out quite how to use it yet. Maintain consistency here. Type is neat because it tells me about the type of data that is in the cell. And this is a game changer for me. This is what I will be using, or something similar to this in the future, instead of using clunky, if the cell is blank, then do this, then do that. Instead, I can call the cell type. And if it's blank, I always get a B. If I have a text value, then this cell always returns an L, anything with a text. And if there's a numerical value, then I get a V. And that's the same if I use the function output of, say, the pi function to get a value, then it returns a V. And I feel like this would be much more effective than using checks for if the cell is empty, or if is number, or if is blank. There's all kinds of... This would just be so much more straightforward than some of the things that I've been doing. This has actually changed my mentality about how I will be checking function conditions in other places. Anyway, overload. Width has to do with the number of characters that you can fit into a cell based on the current cell width. And it is, let's see if I can do it this way. Let's see if I can force this to work. No, not really. change my decimal values. No. It just returns information on the width. And this particular input returns two outputs. It returns the, I think this is the rounded off to the nearest integer width of the cell. Let's see, is that in, it doesn't appear to be in pixels, so maybe it is in based on the size of the text. Let's just see if that works. I get a much larger value then. If I take that whole thing and increase the size of the text quite a bit, very, very large, it still says 17. So I'm not entirely sure what that number brings up. The true or false, though, that is based on whether or not it is the original width or the default width of the cell. And I don't know if there's a good way to reestablish that, so I'm going to just pick a different cell to check. The cell over here I haven't mucked with. There we go. That cell, cell L13, has not been modified from the default width of cells in Excel. And those are all of the options for the cell function and its variety of outputs. I hope you can see how these would be useful in a variety of different contexts. If you enjoyed this video or found it to be helpful, please like it so that I know that it's been used and useful, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. Thank you for watching. Happy excelling!